My son put a lockbox on my front door on a Wednesday in March, and nobody gave me the combination. Not my son. Not the agent he'd hired. A man named Garrett, 40-something, quarter zip with his brokerage logo on the chest, the kind who brings a folder to a first meeting, and already knows the square footage of your house before he knocks. Not my daughter-in-law, who arrived 2 days later with a label maker, and the energy of someone who'd been waiting for this particular task for a very long time. The lockbox was gray and scuffed and sat off the door handle like a thing that had always been there. Every morning I went to collect the mail. I had to reach around it. My name is Agnes Whitmore. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived in the same house on Willowbrook Crescent in Guelph, Ontario for 34 years. 3 bedrooms, a finished basement, a backyard where my husband Frank planted marigolds in 1993 and put them too close to the fence. They've never had room to spread properly. Every summer they come back anyway, bunched up against the cedar, orange, and completely committed to their bad location. Frank died 6 years ago. Heart disease. He was 64. I've made coffee for one person every morning since, and for the first 2 years, I did it without entirely meaning to. Welcome to Fierce Mom Stories, where the women who were spoken about in the third person get the last word. Drop a comment and make sure you're subscribed. The house on Willowbrook has 3 bedrooms and a fair bit of equity and an address I've spent 34 years making inconvenient to leave. My son has always known it was a good house. This year, he decided it was a sellable one. My son is 44. He has Frank's build and his father's particular habit of deciding things are reasonable before he's checked whether they are. He came over on a Saturday in February with a bag of Timbits and a brochure for a place called Heritage Pines Retirement Living in Elora. Fitness classes, a wellness center, a photo on the cover of a woman laughing at a salad. He set the brochure on my kitchen table face up and slid it 2 inches toward me, the way someone slides a document they've already signed. He said, "Simone and I have been talking." He said it the way people introduce decisions they've already made. "About what?" I said. He said the house was a lot to manage alone. He said the yard. He said the stairs. There are 5 stairs to the front door, and my hip replacement was 3 years ago and works fine. He said the neighborhood was changing. Then he turned to no one in particular and said she's not on top of things the way she used to be. I was standing 4 feet away with a kettle in my hand. I want you to sit with that sentence for a moment. Not the words, the direction. He said it to the room about me, in front of me, like I was a piece of furniture that had developed opinions about its own upholstery. I poured the water, I let it steep, and I asked him the question I already knew the answer to. "Who did you talk to before you came here today?" He looked at the brochure. That was the first answer. The second answer came in pieces over the next 20 minutes. There was an agent, Garrett, who specializes in senior transitions, 2 words that sound like a service and mean something else entirely. Garrett had run some numbers. The market was good right now. If we waited, we'd be leaving money on the table. There it was. I said, "And where would I be in this we?" He tapped the cover of Heritage Pines. "She'll be fine in a home, Mom." That's what he said. 7 words, delivered to a laminated photograph. Here's the thing about that sentence. It wasn't cruel. My son isn't cruel. He's efficient. Efficiency is worse because it doesn't require you to look at the person. He said it the way you'd tell someone the recycling goes out on Tuesdays. I didn't argue. I said, "Do you want more coffee?" He said no. He had to get going. He left the brochure on my table. I read it after his car backed out of the driveway. Studios start at $4,200 a month. That's a number he had clearly already looked at and clearly already decided how to cover. I put the brochure in the drawer with the takeout menus, and I went outside and stood by Frank's marigolds for a while because I needed to be somewhere he'd been. To be fair to my son, and I am going to be fair to him, because the truth is more complicated than the easy version, he has a reason to believe he has standing in that house. In 2007, Frank had his first serious heart episode. He was in the ICU for 9 days. We didn't know, that autumn, how much time we had. A lawyer on Cork Street advised us on estate planning. Probate in Ontario can be slow and expensive, and Frank wanted things clean. So we transferred the house into my son's name. My son took time off work. He drove Frank to cardiology appointments at Guelph General, stayed some nights when I was too exhausted to stay awake myself. 3 months. It wasn't nothing. But here's what happened in that lawyer's office, and this is the part that grew in the dark for 17 years. There were 4 pages. The lawyer explained the transfer. My son heard the sentence he wanted, "We're putting the house in your name," and he stopped listening. There was a clause interest, a life interest to Frank and me and to the survivor of us. He initialed it without reading it. I watched him do it. Frank was sitting in a wheelchair 8 feet away, and I did not stop him. I've thought about that more times than I'd like to admit. My son has believed for 17 years that he owns that house, and in a way he does. He holds the fee simple interest. What's left when the life interests end? Every year I stayed, the assumption compounded. My daughter-in-law does the arithmetic out loud at Christmas. She's 41. She married my son in 2003. She's not a careless woman, and she's not a lazy one. She's been building a case, quietly, out of a single afternoon in 2016 when I said no. That year, she had a plan for an online home goods business. She'd researched it. Some of it was good. She needed $50,000 to start. I said no. I told her the truth. I don't lend inside a family. I give or I don't, and I wasn't in a position to give $50,000. That was accurate. It was also, I realize now, a very tidy sentence to say to someone who was already braced for a no. In 2022, I gave my granddaughter Isla $8,000 toward her nursing program at the University of Guelph. My daughter-in-law found out at Christmas. She smiled and said, "That's so generous, Agnes," and I watched her file it. Not as generosity, as a ranking. The file has been sitting in the room ever since, taking up a chair. Garrett came to the door in early March with a folder and a practiced handshake. He called me Mrs. Whitmore, which was polite. He asked to walk the property, which is what agents say instead of come into your house. He measured nothing. He took photographs on his phone. He told me the roof was aging, the same wrong detail my son had used, which told me exactly where my son had gotten it. At the door on his way out, I asked him a direct question. I asked whether he understood that I lived here. He gave me the look I've seen on men who've decided not to ask follow-up questions. "Of course," he said. "But these decisions are usually a family matter, Mrs. Whitmore. I've been through this myself." Then he told me about his mother. A house in Kitchener he'd sold in 38 days after her stroke. He said it was the kindest thing he ever did. He said it twice. I believed him. That was what made my stomach turn. He hadn't built a business on deception. He'd built it on the sincere belief that families decide and owners cope. He had never once asked me a question and then waited for the answer. The sign went in on a Friday. The lockbox appeared the following Wednesday. My son signed the listing agreement as my attorney, in fact. There's a line for that on the form, and used a power of attorney I'd given him in 2013 when I had my hip replacement and wanted someone able to act if something happened during surgery. He signed as my agent, and Garrett emailed me a courtesy copy. The way you'd CC the person whose car you're having towed. I printed it at the library on Stone Road for 20 cents a page. I read it with the pen Frank kept on my desk. A blue Pilot, the kind that cost almost nothing, which is why he bought 4 packs and never threw them out. I still have 3. I underlined a reference on page 5 to a power of attorney, executed and registered, with a document date. 2013. I sat there for a while with the pen in my hand, because 2013 was a real document. I had signed it, and I had meant it at the time. The part Garrett didn't know, and that my son apparently didn't remember, was what happened in the spring of 2021. I'll tell you, but not yet. The order matters. The lockbox stayed on my door for 6 weeks. Every time someone opened it, I could hear the mechanism catch from the back bedroom. The listing photographer came and moved my furniture without asking. Then the stager, then my daughter-in-law. She arrived with 14 flat-pack boxes and a label maker, and the focus of a woman who had been rehearsing this in her head for some time. She said she was just decluttering. She said buyers couldn't see past personal items. Personal items! Frank's fishing tackle hung in the garage, the small blue vase on the windowsill, the one I'd bought with my mother at a shop in Victoria in 1988 that's been a cafe for 20 years now. The quilt Frank's mother made from his old flannel shirts, folded at the end of the bed. I told my daughter-in-law she could have the shelves in the den. I said the back bedroom stayed as it was. She said, of course, in the voice people use when they've heard a request and intend to revisit it later. Around 2 o'clock, I came out of the bathroom and found her holding Frank's workshop apron. Heavy canvas, Whitmore electrical, embroidered over the chest pocket in gold thread that's frayed at both ends now. He wore it every weekend for 20 years. It had been hanging on the hook by the back door since the spring he died, because that's where it lived. She had it folded over her arm. She was reaching for a black garbage bag. "This one's donation," she said. "It's worn through, Agnes." I took it out of her hands. I didn't pull. I just closed my fingers around the strap and lifted, and she let go, and neither of us said anything for about 4 seconds. Then she wrote TBD on a label and stuck it to the box by the door, and I understood that I was going to be in that box eventually, too, with a word on me. My street is a quiet one. 31 houses, most of them built in the same decade. Most of the people who live there bought before the internet. The sign went in on a Friday, and by Saturday morning, the street had a story. My neighbor Muriel came over with a chicken and potato casserole, foil on top, which is how neighbors in Ontario say I've heard something and I'm worried. She held my arms at the door and looked at my face the way you look at something you're checking for damage. "You just say the word, Agnes," she said. "If it's too much, if you're not." And she didn't finish the sentence, which was how I knew exactly what the end of it was. 2 days later, her husband told me my son was being very good about the whole thing, keeping his voice kind. The way people do when they've already decided how the story ends. By the time April arrived, I had become, on my own street, in the house I'd lived in for 34 years, a situation that was being managed. I want you to sit in that with me for a moment. Not the sale, the pronoun. I need to tell you something I haven't mentioned yet. For 26 years, I worked as a law clerk at a real estate firm on McDonald Street in Guelph. McDonald Stewart and Associates. Title searches, closing coordination, document registration, transfer deeds. I sat at a desk and processed the legal paperwork for other people's most important days, over and over again, for 26 years. I retired in 2019. My son was at the retirement party. He gave a speech that was very warm and referred to me as kind of like the firm's admin person. I'm not telling you this so you'll think I'm clever. Half the people I worked with could have done what I did that spring, with the same 20 minutes and the same parking space. I'm telling you because of what it means that he never asked. You cannot take something from someone you've been paying attention to. Remember what I just told you. It matters later, but not for the reason you think. On the 12th of April, I drove to the Guelph Land Registry Office on Woolwich Street. Anyone can walk in and search the parcel register for any property in the province. It costs $12 for a certified copy. No application, no license, no favor required. You ask the clerk, give them the property identification number, and they print it while you wait. I had registered documents at that counter for 26 years. The woman on duty recognized me. The parcel register gave me the chain of title going back to 1991, the original purchase transfer, the mortgage reconveyances, and then 2 entries that mattered, because I was the one who had put them both there. The first I read standing at the counter, out loud, under my breath, because I wanted to hear it in a room. Document number, on 2007 1112847. Registered October 9, 2007. Transfer from Frank William Whitmore and Agnes May Whitmore to their son, reserving unto the transferors and to the survivor of them a life interest in the said property during their natural lives. 17 years. That clause had been sitting in a public index on Woolwich Street, indexed under both our names. available to anyone who walked in and typed either one. $12 and a parking spot. That was the entire barrier. The second document I did not read at the counter. I folded it in thirds and put it in my purse, and I drove home the long way, past Guelph General, where Frank used to go for his cardiology follow-ups. I already knew what it said. I'd been the one to sign it. Here is the summer of 2021, and why that second document exists. In June of that year, my son took me for coffee on Gordon Street. He was 2 cups in before he got to it. He said he'd been thinking about options. He said there was equity in the house doing nothing. He had a plan, a rental property in Cambridge, a down payment. I said no, once, clearly, without drama. 6 weeks later, I got a letter from my financial institution. It was addressed to me, thanking me for my recent request to update the beneficiary designation on my registered accounts. I hadn't made any such request. He had used the 2013 power of attorney. He had tried to redirect the beneficiaries on my RRSP and my TFSA, my retirement savings, from my estate to his own name. The institution required my in-person signature for that kind of change. The request was declined without anyone calling me. My son mentioned it later, annoyed, said the bank had been difficult, said there was some kind of flag he couldn't explain. He never asked what the flag was. That was a closed door. He drove past it. I went to a notary that August and revoked the 2013 power of attorney in writing. I registered the revocation at the Land Titles Office. Document number ON 2021-88443, registered August 11, 2021. I mailed my son a copy. Registered mail, return receipt requested. The way a person who spent her career in document management says something she wants to be able to prove. The delivery confirmation card came back to my mailbox 9 days later. The signature in the acceptance box was not my son's handwriting. It was a looping cursive with a small heart above one of the letters. My daughter-in-law had signed for it. My granddaughter Isla is 22. She's finishing her nursing degree at the University of Guelph and works afternoon shifts at a medical clinic in the West End. She is the only person in my family who looks at a thing and then asks about the thing. She came by on a Tuesday in April with 2 Tim Hortons large doubles. She stopped on the porch and looked at the door. "Gran," she said. "What is that?" "A lockbox." "I know what it is." She set the coffees on the railing. "It looks like a handcuff on your house." Then she sat down on the front step in her scrubs and cried, which I was not prepared for. She'd found out from Instagram. Her father had posted something about exciting changes for the family with a row of emojis. She'd called him and he'd told her to stay out of it. She said she'd come to whatever meeting was happening and make a scene. She said she'd film it. I told her no. I said, if you make a scene, this becomes a story about a family fighting, and everyone in that room will choose the version that's easiest to believe about a 67-year-old woman who lives alone. She said, "So you're just going to let them?" I said, "I'm going to let them get all the way to the end." She looked at me for a moment longer than 22-year-olds usually look at anyone. Then she said, "Okay, but I'm bringing you coffee every week until this is over." She did. Every single week. That girl has never once talked about me like I wasn't standing right there. Now I'll tell you why I didn't simply say no in February and be done with it. There are 2 reasons, and the first one has a name. Her name is Beatrice, a woman I knew from my years at the firm. In 2022, Beatrice's daughter decided her mother wasn't managing well, and they had a serious disagreement in Beatrice's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. Beatrice was loud. She threw her reading glasses across the table. 6 months later, her daughter filed for guardianship through Ontario Superior Court. I read the supporting affidavit. 2 paragraphs described that afternoon. Agitated, unable to accept assistance, threw an object. Beatrice spent $28,000 on legal fees and she won. She kept her independence. She also stopped having people over. Something in her went quiet that never came back. When my son put the Heritage Pines brochure on my table in February, I called a lawyer I knew. Helen Ramsey, elder law, Gordon Street, no nonsense, charges in 6-minute increments. She said something I've said to myself 200 times since. Agnes, if you fight this in your kitchen, you lose. Not because you're wrong. Because a kitchen is their room. Anything you say, there becomes a description of your state of mind. Pick a room where the only thing that matters is what's written down. I said I knew exactly the room. She said she thought I might. The second reason I waited is quieter, and I'd rather not say it out loud. I was waiting for him to stop on his own. Every single morning of those 6 weeks, I woke up and thought, maybe today he pulls into the driveway and comes up those 5 steps and says, "Mom, I got ahead of myself." That's all it would have taken. Not an apology. 1 sentence. I'd have handed him a coffee, and we'd have never spoken of it again. I hadn't finished hoping yet. The accepted offer came in the first week of May. Closing set for June 17th. My son called that evening, very pleased with himself, and said they'd gotten good numbers. He said not to worry about any of the details. He said my daughter-in-law would handle the packing. He said Heritage Pines had a suite available facing the garden, and he'd already put down a deposit, which is a thing you can do for another adult if you have a piece of paper that says you can. I said okay. Then I got Frank's blue Pilot pen out of the cup on the desk, and on the back of a grocery receipt, I wrote 3 things: the closing date, the name of the buyer's lawyer's firm, and the address on Wyndham Street. 26 years of habit. You write down the file number. On June 17th, I wore the blue blazer I keep for important occasions. I ironed it, which I hadn't done since Frank's funeral, son. I put my driver's license in the outside pocket of my purse so I wouldn't be fumbling at a table full of people. If you've ever ironed a jacket for a room where someone expected you to be furniture, you know exactly what I was doing at that ironing board. Do me a favor before we go into that room. Hit subscribe and stay to the end. What happens next is the whole reason I'm telling you this. The closing was at Renwick and Associates on Wyndham Street. The conference room had a long table, a credenza with a coffee station, and a box of tissues in the middle, because they know. The buyers came in first. A couple in their mid-30s, first house, Ernest. The woman had a folder with a photo of a small terrier clipped to the front. Their agent sat beside them. Garrett came in with 2 pens and told me I looked nice. My daughter-in-law came in with a travel mug and did not sit next to me. My son came in last, on the phone, said, "Yeah, we're signing right now," ended the call, put his hand on the back of my chair. Not on me, on the chair, and said, "Doing okay, Mom?" The solicitor's law clerk came in with a file cart and a stack of documents 4 inches thick. She went through the IDs. My son laid his copy of the 2013 power of attorney on the table, the copy he'd had folded in his truck's center console for 11 years. Then came a knock at the conference room door. A young woman entered. Maybe 30, blazer, reading glasses on a lanyard, a printed page in her hand with a colored tab on it. She apologized for the interruption. She said she was Amara, from the title review team, and she needed 5 minutes before anyone signed. My son said, "Is there a problem?" She said, "There's a history I need to walk through." She put the document on the table and turned it so it faced the room, the way considerate people do. She read the title chain like someone reading a grocery list. No drama at all. The 1991 purchase, transfer, the mortgages, the reconveyances. Then she reached the page with the colored tab. October 9, 2007. Document on 2/7/111/2847. Transfer from Frank William Whitmore and Agnes May Whitmore to their son, Colin Frank Whitmore, reserving unto the transferors and to the survivor of them a life interest in the said property during their natural lives. My son sat up. "That's when they put it in my name." "Partly," she said. "The fee simple transferred. But there's a reservation clause. Your mother holds a life interest. The property can't convey without her joinder." He looked at the table, then at me, then at the table again. "No. The house has been in my name for 17 years. I pay the property tax." "Remainder holders often do," Amara said. "But the life tenant holds the right of possession and use. That's your mother. We can't insure the title without her consent." He stood up then, fast enough that his chair went back into the wall. He said this was a mistake. This was an error. What did you do, Mom? What did you do? I didn't do anything on June 17th. I did it on a Thursday in October of 2007, sitting beside his father in a lawyer's office on Cork Street. On the page, he initialed without reading. The document did what I signed it to do. My daughter-in-law said, in the voice she reserves for difficult situations, "Let's everyone breathe." Then, because she couldn't help herself, "Agnes, this is a family decision. We're trying to do right by you. You're part of this family." I opened my purse. I took out the Heritage Pines brochure, which I had carried since February, and I set it on the table face up. The buyers could see the cover from across the table. "She'll be fine in a home." Printed right there. Neither my son nor my daughter-in-law had ever noticed where the sentence came from. They hadn't even written their own line. I said 6 words. "I'm the life tenant. I'm not signing." Amara was still working. That's the thing about someone who does their job properly. The emotional weather doesn't change the checklist. She looked up from her page. "There's a second item." She said she'd run both names in the parcel register that morning as part of the standard day of search. She said the power of attorney being presented, document on 2023-74219, had a registered revocation against it. Document on 2021-88443, registered August 11, 2021. Garrett said, "That can't be right." "It's been registered for nearly 4 years, Amara said evenly. Which means the authority to act on behalf of Mrs. Whitmore was revoked before the listing agreement was executed. The listing agreement, as presented, doesn't have valid authority behind it. I reached into my purse one more time and placed a small green card on the table. The delivery confirmation from August 2021. Registered mail, return receipt, signed for at the Willowbrook Crescent address. The signature in the acceptance box was the looping cursive with the small heart. My daughter-in-law made a sound like she'd been pushed. She said, "I don't. I get so much mail." She started to cry. I want to be precise about this. She was not crying about me. She was crying at a table full of people who had just watched her sign for it. Garrett tried once more. He said, "With respect, these are family decisions." And Amara, 30 years old, a stranger, doing her job, said the most accurate sentence spoken in that room all afternoon. "Title doesn't ask the family," she said. "Title follows what's registered." After that, it took 15 minutes, and it was all procedure. No title insurance could be issued. Without insurance, the mortgage couldn't fund. Without funding, there was no closing. The buyer's agent asked carefully whether it could be cured. Amara said, "Only by the life tenant, voluntarily." Everyone in that room looked at me at the same moment. I picked up my license and put it back in my purse. I looked at my son, who was still standing there, holding a pen he had brought from home. "You get the house," I said. "You've always been getting the house. You get it the day I'm done with it, not 1 hour before." Then I said good morning to the buyers, and I told them I was sorry, and I meant it. And I walked out of that conference room on Wyndham Street at 11:12, past the reception desk, through the glass doors, and I sat in my car in the parking lot for 4 minutes before I could get the key in. In the days after, I mailed the buyers a certified check for their appraisal and inspection fees, $970, and a note that said, "None of this was your fault. I hope you find the right place, soon." They wrote back. They sent a photo of the terrier. I filed a complaint with the Real Estate Council of Ontario about Garrett, not for the deed, which he had no duty to catch, for listing an occupied property under a power of attorney without verifying the authority behind it, and for never once asking the person living there a direct question. The brokerage took the Senior Transitions page off its website within 3 weeks. I made a report to the appropriate authorities. A constable came to my kitchen table and sat for 40 minutes and read through the full file: the listing agreement, the POA, the revocation, the green card. She said most of the time they receive a feeling in a phone hall. The file she opened is not empty. On a Thursday morning in late June, I took Frank's bolt cutters from the hook in the garage. They've been there since 1998, between the tin snips and the extension cord, and I cut the lockbox off my front door in the middle of the afternoon, with Muriel watching from her driveway across the street. It took 1.5 seconds. 6 weeks of that thing knocking against my door, and it took 1.5 seconds. Muriel crossed the street and stood on the walk and cried and apologized, and I let her. Because 34 years of being good neighbors earns you one difficult spring. She said nobody on this street asked you anything. Not one of us. I said no, but you're asking now. Helen Ramsey sent my son a letter citing Ontario's Substitute Decisions Act and the protections it extends against the unauthorized use of a power of attorney. 2 pages, very clear, no drama. It did not require a response, though it eventually got one through his own solicitor, which told me everything I needed to know about whether it had landed. I recorded a new ownership declaration that September. I changed the locks. I signed a new limited power of attorney, naming Isla for medical decisions only. I did not touch my son's remainder interest. Not one word of it. Frank had a pen he could barely hold in October 2007, and he signed that deed exactly the way he meant to. I'm not going to revise his last wish because his son had a bad year. Isla moved into the spare room in August, $50 a month, and she handles the recycling. She leaves for her clinical shifts at 5:30 in the morning, and I hear the kettle through the wall. My son and I speak a few times a year now. Birthdays. A brief call when his truck needed repairs. He hasn't apologized. I've stopped waiting for that the way I stopped waiting for the knock. People tell me I outsmarted my family. I want to be clear about this because somebody listening right now is doing the arithmetic on their own house. There was no trick. There was a land registry office on Woolwich Street, a $12 certified copy, and a 30-year-old woman with a colored tab on a printout who did her job properly. Any person in that family could have walked into that office on any Tuesday for 17 years. One of them did. In September, I pruned Frank's marigolds back where they'd been crowded all summer. They came in thicker the following year than they had in years. Wrong spot, wrong spacing, planted by a man who meant well and didn't always read the back of the packet. They come up every summer anyway. Go figure. If this made you wonder what's actually on the title of your own home, go pull the parcel register this week. In Ontario, it's $12 at the Land Registry Office. Drop a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.